All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's live chat. Lots to talk about. Hope you have a lot of questions for me. And we're going to have a guest in the second period. So I guess we're going like hockey, right? We have an hour and a half, and we're going to take your questions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the industry in the first 30 minutes. Then we're going to bring on Charles Linder, who's a friend of mine and is doing a lot behind the scenes in the bee industry and is a commercial beekeeper. And then after having him on the second period, we're going to go back to Q&A and talk about splitting bees and all kinds of stuff. So welcome everybody, folks from all over the United States, outside of the United States, bee people everywhere. That's right, Grammy. They are everywhere. And it's a good time to be a beekeeper. There is all kinds of stuff out there, unless it rains like 7 out of 10 days like it has around here. So that's just part of beekeeping. So all of our splits that we've made, the colonies that we have purchased or whatever, any young colonies, we're having to feed them, even though normally in Tennessee, I wouldn't be feeding this time of the year. Surprise, surprise. Hopefully we'll get some sunshine next week. San Francisco. I just spoke to Los Angeles. I get those confused. Kalamazoo. That's got some beekeeping history over there. Caribbean. All right. And one of the things we're going to talk about, since I just saw Mike's bees, we're going to talk a little bit about oxalic acid. We're going to talk about splitting too, but so there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the bee industry behind the scenes, and we either benefit from it or we don't benefit from it based on what's happening. And when I was a hobby beekeeper, a smaller beekeeper, or even when I was running a couple hundred hives and I was not aware of what was going on in the industry, I just did not realize all of that, all that was going on behind the scenes that affected me, whether I realized it or not. And so we have dealt with a lot of challenges in the last 20 something years I've been in beekeeping, availability of treatments, new information. One of the things that has been really important for the commercial industry is honey prices, pollination prices, and this affects all of us. Here in Tennessee, we have people who are importing funny honey and labeling it in Gatlinburg and Sevierville and Nashville for like it's sourwood, and it's rice syrup and corn syrup, and they're getting it in for $2 a pound or whatever it is for the funny honey, and then they're marking it up the same price that you all would for 12, 15, $20 a pound, and they're making a killing, or they'll undercut you and still make a killing. And so there's a lot that needs to be done to protect our beloved bee industry, and we'll be talking about that a lot. But Mike's Bees LLC, they produce the oxalic acid product Easy Ox. And this isn't a plug that I get paid to do. To me, it's very exciting. We need a competitive market out there to best serve us, right? So one of the products that's been out there for a while, the legal product for oxalic acid is apabioxol. And whatever, they can do what they want, but it is expensive as all get out. And supposedly, at that time, it was the only legal product to use, but it was crazy expensive. And there wasn't any other option if you wanted to do it the legal way. Well, now there is. Mike Bees LLC created the Easy Ox product, him and his sons, and it has gone through EPA regulations just like it's supposed to. And it is way cheaper. It also is the only one at this time that you can legally use 2 grams. The apabioxol is supposed to be a 1 gram dose per box. This is double the dose. And so this is great. This is pushing things forward and also is more affordable for us to use. We also have other oxalic acid things in the works with oxalic acid strips, and we have new vaporizers. They're working on products on that as well. And then we have the instant vaporizer. There's just a lot of innovation in that field right now. And that competition creates a very good situation for all of us. So that is exciting. for me to see because more innovation all the time. There was a comment earlier about the Premier frames, and you're welcome. There's several good companies out there. I've been very successful with many frames, but the Premier are very nice because they use A.H. Meyer wax. So it's a higher quality wax. I've been very satisfied with the extra heavy wax, which is the double wax. And more importantly, if I had to pick between the two, I like the frames better than the foundation because it is the heaviest frame on the market. And I get so tired of the thin frames that I purchased from a certain company that were not glued properly either. And Premier glues theirs very well. I've actually seen the process on the automation on the machines. It's impressive to say the least. And so, again, it is nice to have competition and competition here in the United States. It's a good time to be a beekeeper, and there's a lot more on the way. So, and James Thomas, you said you are feeding. I have a lot of nectar in my brood boxes. With all the rain, will they use up some of it and make room for the queen to lay? They will use some of it. Depends on how much there is and how strong the colony and how much they're brooding. But that is definitely something that we're seeing here, that bigger colonies are not gaining weight, and the small colonies have lost weight over the last week to 10 days, which maybe for some hives that are plugged out, that can be an advantage. If they were thinking about swarming, oh, this weather probably curbed that swarm stimuli. It's been unfortunate, though, because it was a really good period. It could have been a really good period for privet and clover honey. And we're just hoping that it dries out, but the long-term forecast is not good. Our flow started off fantastic in this region of Tennessee, and this just constant rain, like 70% of the week is just rain and overcast, even on the days it's not raining. And there's just not great weather for honey crops. But we are feeding our nukes and our splits, and they are still building up. Heck, I threw some pollen patties in them too because I want them to be very strong, and I want them to draw out their combs and get to double deeps by the end of June. And they're going to do it. By golly. Okay, so do we have some questions, Chris? Anything that
Nothing as of yet. Nothing as of yet.
All right, guys, get busy. Come on now. I got plenty I can talk about, but I'll take your questions too.
Here's one from Mark. I apologize.
Okay. I'm working hard to stop swarming here in Omaha, Nebraska in my 11 hives. I smashed 16 queen cells last week and 6 this week in the same hive. When will they stop? So it can be really tricky sometimes, especially if the colonies are quite strong, and how we curb colonies that want to swarm. First of all, we've got to give that queen room to lay if she doesn't have it. And the more she's laying young new brood, the more that fights the tendency of swarming. The pheromones that the young brood emits, the uncapped brood, that really curbs swarming. Once they already have it in their system, though, it usually takes at least 2 times of cutting the cells to get it out of them. But the cells can't be capped. And then if you come and crush them multiple times, they still have got to get some relief. You've got to get that honey out of the way. You've got to get the queen in room to lay, room for her to lay. And if you can do all those things, it works. So it just takes some time, and it can take multiple times to do it. And if it gets to be where it's just like, dadgummit, it's just too difficult, you can remove the queen and then come back and cut the cells again. And then you can either use one of the queen cells, or you can recombine the queen later. But it's best to just not let it get to that point if possible. And it's difficult. Some hives, it's easier than others. This is where drawn comb really comes in handy. If you can pull out some frames of food, put some drawn combs in there so she can lay that, you'll be in a lot better shape faster. Good evening from New Brunswick, Canada. The dandelions are in full bloom with more to come. That sounds awesome. We don't really have any significant dandelions down here. We have some that contribute some pollen, but we don't have the same type of exciting dandelion flows that you guys do. It's significant up there. Hope you guys have a good bee season.
Look at this.
Okay. East Texas today was the first full day of sun in over a month. Holy smokes, 30 inches of rain. Wow, that is rough. Rough on bees right there.
I think you'd have to have a boat. You'd have to have a boat to get out of that if you got 30 inches.
For real. I mean, we've had a lot of rain here. We had 8 inches in 24 hours one of the days, which was fun. If it flooded, I have to go like 15 minutes around to get to some of my bee yards because it just landslide over the road. But we haven't had 30 inches, thank goodness. We've probably had somewhere around 15, but 30 inches is insane. I hope you guys are okay down there. That's a lot of rain, even for East Texas. But yeah, it's rough. And there's nothing you can do about that too, because if your bees can't get out and get pollens, if they can't get out and get nectar, they're going to burn through their stuff. And bees actually get thirsty sitting in their hive like that. You would think that was, counterintuitive, but when the bees are sitting in there in their hives and it's just raining and raining, they're getting thirsty, and they actually hold back from feeding the larvae, not only because there's not as much pollen and nectar coming in, but they're not able to send any water gatherers out when it's like that. And the first thing you'll see whenever those bees can finally get out and fly, they go hit a puddle somewhere and they go bring water, and they're like, finally, water. It's pretty wild.
All right, got some questions for you. Everybody's flooding in now. Here we go.
All right, good deal.
Question from Thomas.
Is there such a thing as too light to swarm? Too light to swarm. Chris, do you know what you think he means by that?
My guess is maybe a hive is not plugged out, but maybe it's just wanting to swarm for some other reason. Would be my guess.
So that sounds probably what I'm thinking it is too. So bees really don't swarm unless certain conditions are met. Now they can abscond, which a lot of people say, "Oh, my bees swarmed in the fall and I lost them." That is incorrect. That is your bees absconding. Now, sometimes you can send a swarm in the fall. I've seen this happen before, but these are very strong colonies that are doing it. It's a good fall flow, or you fed them a bunch. And in the fall flow, they don't send off these giant swarms that you see in spring. You don't see these big primary swarms that are 3 to 6 pounds of bees. You see little bitty 2-frame of bees swarms. And I see that later in the year, but you still have a nice colony left. And not all colonies do that in the fall. And honestly, you don't even hardly notice. But if you don't meet certain conditions, they're not going to swarm on you. So tons of brood and bees, but not a lot of nectar and honey stores. So no swarm cells. So, if they're light and they're not plugged out on nectar and all kinds of stuff, they're not going to swarm on you. That's why typically the best years for swarming, I mean, pretty much the best years period for swarming are years we have wonderful honey flows and tons of flying days, and we get just so much pollen and so much nectar, the bees just can't hardly get it out of the way of the queen fast enough. Those are years where you're going to get a lot of swarming. But yeah, if they're light, you're really teetering on also the bees going backwards too, because bees consume a lot of food. And I would never want to see a 5-frame nuke with less than 1 frame of food, of honey or sugar syrup, unless they are being actively fed by you. And I would never want to see a colony that has 8 frames of bees or more have less than 3 deep frames worth of food. Any lighter than that, and those bees are not going to build up properly unless there's a flow going. So Mark says, I have 4 frames of bees and a 10-frame deep super, and half of them swarmed 2 days ago. They left 2 frames of eggs and young larvae behind. I think it was because I had a small entrance. So it was only 4 frames of bees and a 10-frame deep, and half of them swarmed 2 days ago. That is really odd. I wonder if maybe they got a little honey bound, and if they had old stores from the winter or something, and the queen couldn't expand. That seems really odd. Sometimes colonies that aren't quite great do weird things, and that doesn't sound like a great queen unless they're just completely plugged up with honey on the edges. All right, next question, Chris. Wow, Cayman is all spiffed up. This is not me spiffed up, Jed. Aren't you supposed to be welding? So, speaking of Jed, Laurel is out wax dipping right now. I have some equipment I wanted to wax dip, and I'm trying a thing or two out. And so she's out there dipping a handful of stuff. I think she's probably only got about 15 to 20 more minutes to go. So I wasn't able to get it all done. I was feeding all the nukes before I got in here. All right, next thing.
All right. So we have a question here from C.
I need to move a couple 3-frame nukes into 5 frames with the newly mated queen. Is it okay to feed them with mason jars if I use robber screens on the 5-frame nukes? Absolutely. I don't know where you're at. See, whatever your last name is, I'm not going to try. I'm going to mess it up. But it depends on the time of the year. Like right now, when the bees can fly, there's a little nectar and there's pollen. They're not robbing at all. So you may not have to worry about robber screens this time of the year. I see a lot of new beekeepers who have like double deep colonies too, and they have their entrance reducers all the way on, and there's just this little bitty opening. And then all of a sudden they get this massive beard on it on a hot day, and they're like, what's going on? Are they going to swarm on me? No, those bees can't ventilate properly. So it depends on your time of the year. I don't even use any entrance reducers or robber screens or even consider using anything like that this time of the year in Tennessee. But maybe you're in the deep south and you have your dearth already started. And then, yes, the robbing screens would help. But the mason jars, okay, Central North Carolina flow is about over. Well, if it is about over, go ahead and put them on then and give them some protection. But yeah, you should be just fine. And you definitely want to be giving them feed because they have some growing to do.
Okay, Mark, here, Mark, shed some more light. We'll try to wrap this up here with Mark.
It was a swarm I caught about a week ago, and they swarmed again. That is really bizarre. I have no clue, Mark. I'm so sorry. That bees sometimes just do that kind of stuff that make you scratch your head. We know a lot about bees, but sometimes they just like to let us know that we just don't know it all, and we definitely don't. That is really bizarre. And hey, by the way, guys, I appreciate those of you who are putting where you're at into the question. That really helps me formulate. I don't know everything about all the locations, but it really helps give me a little context. Central Kentucky bees. I wonder where they're from. Kama, could you recommend a nice uncapping tank? Hilco has been sold out of their 30-inch model for a couple of weeks now, and I need one soon. I haven't seen the new Hilco models, and so maybe they're different. One of the issues with the early Hilco models is they didn't have enough space underneath the frame. So if you uncapped a lot into them, it would build up and you couldn't stick your frames down into them, especially if you were extracting deeps, it just would not work at all. So that was one of the issues. Now, maybe I know Hilco was talking about changing that up, but they don't have theirs in right now. I have seen multiple brands, Thorn, Maxent, Dadent. I think Savan has one. There's probably a couple other ones. I'm an American guy. This stuff is an investment to me that one day if I sell, I'm going to get my money back out of it. I know it. And if I have to use it a bunch, I want something that I really like. I really like the American made ones. The Thorn would personally be my favorite. They have the nicest lids on them. The gates are really nice. They're really overbuilt. It'll outlive all of us. And the Maxit ones are also really good. The Dadent's gone downhill over the years, in my opinion. They're still good. It'll still work for you. I know there's price point's an issue. That's going to be more than a Hilco. I really like the American made stuff.
All right. I have a question here from Bill.
Bill, has anyone done a study of wax dipping before assembling boxes compared to wax dipping after assembly? Yes, I know guys that do that. Very large commercial operations, but every one of them that I know of assembles it almost as soon as it's cool enough because they can still warp and twist, and the heat can sometimes cause some issues with that as well. So it depends on the type of wood that you're using. Some woods are better than others, but I know guys that do this. One of the issues with that, Laurel just messaged me about the dipping tank. Boy, it's just like, all right. I just had a message or a detail about it. So I'm just having to teach multiple people about wax dipping tanks. Laurel should know this stuff. She doesn't listen to me. I hope she's watching this because she's fixing to storm through that door.
She's going to really hurt you.
Yeah, she will probably hurt me, and she can. She knows it. That's why you don't marry a girl that used to do blacksmithing. So, Bill Bolton, you can totally do that, but you have to watch warpage, and certain types of woods will warp under that heat or shrink, whatever. So just watch that. And a lot of guys want them assembled because you have already put your staples or screws in there and you've already applied your glue and everything, and it just seals everything up just like that. But yeah, when I was visiting Randy Oliver, he was doing his unassembled. So totally can be done. And a guy down in Florida did the same. All right. So we have about 7 more minutes before we bring on our guest. Let's go with those questions. And real quick, David Hunter. Hey, David, thanks for helping out our next gen beekeepers. Really appreciate that. Thanks for all you do. Hey, Chris, what's the Hagris beekeeping in the group thing? Is that you?
It's good. Taking care of it.
All right. Thank you. David, really appreciate that. Sorry, sometimes we have spammers or whatever going on. We appreciate that very much. Oh no, Laurel gave me the disappointed face. Now, one of the things that we're looking to do this year, and I haven't announced it officially, but we have our next gen program, which is where we have 11 to 20-year-old kids, young adults that are going to get a full ride, t-shirts, special classes, hotel reimbursement, all that kind of stuff. And that's our main thing, the Next Gen Bee program. These are some of the finest young men and women in beekeeping, and some of them are already educators and doing a lot. So we're going to have that. But one of the things that because of guys like David and others, we have decided to add another subcategory. It's not going to be quite as elaborate, but we are going to have a program for the extra young. And we're going to go down, not very young, but we're going to probably go down to 7 or 8 up to 10, because there are a few kids that are exceptional in that age group and that are involved, and we'd like to get them a free ticket. We're not going to do the hotels, but we'll get them a free ticket and some gear and help get them in this year. So if you know anybody who's really an active beekeeper and hardcore for a young kid like that, let us know and we will get them in. All right. Bill Bolton, thanks, man. Appreciate you again. Keep firing away with the questions. All right, Chris, let's do 5 more minutes of questions before we bring Charlie on.
All right. And again, I apologize if people have asked questions. I'm not trying to skip anyone. We're just going in kind of random order here. All right. I have a question here from Patrick.
All right, East Tennessee. If you want to scale up your operation, at what hive count would you buy large pieces of equipment, uncapping, honey filtration, etc.? So if you are try to find used if you can. You can find some decent used stuff. I started with, I had a Kelly 33 frame, old extractors, like a 72 model. The thing will last longer than I will. That thing's indestructible and easy to work on it if it ever had any problems. So you can find some used stuff to help scale things up. Maybe find someone who's going out. But if you're going to buy brand new, which is okay, there's nothing wrong with that. That's what I did with a lot of my stuff. Make the bees pay for it. One of the nice things about some of these purchases, though, is that it's an asset. It's a lot easier to sell this stuff and get your money back or part of your money back than it is to sell bees and do the same, especially in Tennessee if there's no bees in the equipment, because you just can't sell used stuff. One of the things we have here in Tennessee, too, if you meet the requirements, we have a TAEP program. It's called TAPE Grant, and it's a cost share, and they'll provide 50% to expand your apiary, whether that's bees or extraction equipment. And I've used it a few times. And if you are eligible, you can get 50% off your extractor or whatever you need. just whatever you do purchase, make sure that you get something that is going to last your growth. I went ahead when I bought my first extractor. It was a 20 frame Dadant, and it was too big for me at the time, but it was a good investment. And then I ended up using it for like 13 years, and then I sold it for almost as much as I paid for it because all this glorious inflation that we have. So, and I got great use out of it. And it's a good piece of equipment. Now the next guy's using it, and it'll keep on going. Right now, if I had to buy a radial extractor of size, I would definitely go with the 36 medium frame Thorn. It's even the motor's made in America. It's got a bigger port on it. It's got it programmed into the motor to where it won't burn up if the honey levels get too high. I like that about it. It's a smart motor. That was one of the issues with the data, and it would go up and I'd blow a fuse every time the honey would get too high. So what hive count? If we're talking serious investments of decent equipment, big stuff, 50 hives, very productive, 50 to 100. But it's all how you're managing it. In Tennessee, if you're doing a good job, you should be making 4,000, 50 production hives. You should be making 4,000 pounds of honey minimum a year off of that, and selling some nukes too. All right, next question, Chris.
I found the leak in our boat. You posted the StreamYard link into the group, so people are joining via that. So
okay. Sorry, Chris.
Okay.
Should you delete it?
People. It's okay. Yeah. Sorry to the people I banned.
This is what happens when I do the technical stuff.
All right. Next up, we have a question here from Kurt.
Kurt, installed a package of bees in early March, Southwest Missouri. Been feeding 1-to-1 since then. They are growing in numbers, but not building comb very well on wax foundations. Anything that I can do? So, Kurt, a good queen with okay foundations. It doesn't have to be perfect, the best coating or the thick coating, but if you're feeding them and they have a good queen, they should be drawing pretty good. So I'm wondering if you have a subpar queen that came with your package. That would be, what I would look into, because one thing that's just universal, if you have a powerful laying queen and you're feeding, they have plenty of nutrition, they should be drawing combs like crazy. So I'm concerned that it's a queen issue. So by the way, folks, I have the Cayman Reynolds beekeeping group on Facebook. If you do Facebook, you can ask this question here, Kurt, and then you could post some pictures of that in the Cayman Reynolds group. And then I see that and I try to get to as many of them as I can. But there's also several other good beekeepers in the group that will give you their opinion. And some of them are wrong, but we figure these things out together. So I saw Charlie commented earlier into that group. So we're at 7:30. We're going to get to some more questions here in a little bit, but we have a lot to talk about with Charles Linder. There is a lot going on in the industry, and many of you don't know about this stuff, but I think that you should. I think it's more important than ever that we communicate, because there are big things going on behind the scenes that could affect you as a hobby beekeeper or a sideliner, and could affect the commercial industry as well. Guys like Charlie, Randy Oliver, are trying to do what they can. Charlie, thanks for coming on tonight. What's up, Charlie?
Good evening.
Yeah.
Well, so long day, typical. Getting ready to go bees tonight,
So I am going to introduce you just to here. So those of you may not know Charlie, but you probably know some of his work. If you've seen the plastic Pro Nuke boxes or a plastic package called the Bee Bus, Charlie manufactures that. He also manufactures other things as well. He's a commercial beekeeper, does watermelon pollination and other things in the bee industry, and also is involved with organizations that look into what could be done to serve the beekeeping community better. And we've got a lot to dive into. As I've mentioned, there's a lot going on behind the scenes in the commercial bee world. There is a lot. We don't a lot of times think that it will affect us as smaller beekeepers, but it definitely will. And we're going to dive into that a little bit so that we can all get on the same page. And I've been spending some time with Charlie. Went out to the almond fields with him this year, and that was a wild experience and quite
Both of
fun.
us.
Yeah, for both of us. And when Charlie ordered $100 and something in food, that was the most wild part.
I was going to blame that on you, Cayman.
Well, too late. The cat's out of the bag. That was a mistake on the guy who took our order's fault. But that was the biggest spread of barbecue I'd ever seen in my life. I'll have to post a picture at some point. But the almonds, all of these different things that are going on, they affect us as well, and more than what we realize. So that being said, the commercial guys need us, I think, to a degree, and we need them, and we're attached at the hip. So let's just all get along. So Charlie, we have a lot going on in this bee industry, and what's kind of going on with the almond and honey prices right now? Oh, can you hear me?
Well, it's literally in the tank. And that's unfortunate because it means the almond growers aren't making a lot of money right now. Almond prices all the way from the mid 90s up until about 3 years ago continued to rise. The California guys developed what they call the California Almond Board, who went out and marketed almonds all over the world. And the demand was far better than the supply. And for the longest time, the acreage in California continued to increase. And of course, at the same time, we had Varroa, so the number of bees decreased. So the price for almond rentals increased substantially over the last 20 years. 25 years ago, if you got $30 for an almond pollination contract, you were doing pretty good. And now the going rate is, we'll say, a little bit north of $180. And that's not clear profit because you got a lot of transportation cost and prep cost and that. But it does make it so that the commercial beekeepers can actually make a decent living off doing some pollination.
Mm-hmm.
With the collapse of almond prices, to give you an example, 5 years ago, almonds were $4.50 to $5 a pound. 2,800 pounds to the acre is the average yield. So pretty good return on investment.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, the cost is $1.35 when I checked it last week.
And costs for farmers have gone way up since the last few years too.
Unreal. It continues to rise. All the fertilizer costs, and of course, for those of you who don't know, California climate is the only place in the U.S. where we can actually raise almonds. There's only 4 or 5 places in the world that are actually really good for almonds because they need some chilly nights, but then they need nice warm days and soft sandy soil. So there's some areas in Australia and some areas in the Middle East that have noticed the $5 almonds, and they said, hey, we can do that too. So 15 years ago, we had probably, I think the number was 94% of the world's almond market we supplied. Mm-hmm. That is down now. I think the last number I saw was 87 or 88%. And they think in the next 10 years, it'll be down below 60%.
So
it's tough. It's tough. Supply and demand. The price went up and everybody in the market. Go ahead.
So the price for almonds are down for the beekeeper. It's not looking good there. They're not planting more orchards of almonds. And then on top of that, the price of our honey is, where are we at with honey right now?
Well, that's an interesting question. New crops coming on. Basically, 2 years ago, we were in the 260, 270 wholesale range. And again, most of your listeners are dealing with a retail market, and their price is much better than that. But the commercial side, most of us who are beekeepers live in areas that don't have a lot of population, and we have a hard time marketing 200,000 or 300,000 pounds of honey in small jars. Example, in my area, we probably sell somewhere around 10 barrels a year at our local stores, but we make in the neighborhood of 200 barrels a year. So we really have to sell that wholesale. Mm-hmm. This year, the price was $1.60 in the drum, so off by a third. Yeah.
And of course, diesel prices and everything else, treatments, woodenware, everything else goes up besides what the farmer and the beekeeper makes.
Yeah, diesel is about right around $1.94 a pound, I think. It's
$1.94 a pound.
uh,
So there's a lot of issues. The commercial industry, they buy a lot of equipment. They invest a lot of money into the beekeeping industry. And so for the hobby beekeepers, they're like, well, how does that really affect me? If the commercial industry goes belly up, then all of a sudden, where are we getting a lot of our bees from? Who's buying bulk equipment? A lot of the companies that sell gear now don't have the ability to sell so much stuff, and that's going to create a shortage of innovation. It's also going to create a shortage of availability, and the prices will go up for hobby beekeepers as well. So I think it's an important thing for the entire industry for the price of honey to go up. And if it did, that would also be good, because the best way to do that is to inhibit all this funny honey being imported into the United States.
you're exactly right, Kim. And the funny honey is a interesting problem. The bigger issue is really for us is the customer knowing what they're getting. Unfortunately, within the U.S., there's so many advertising laws that they skirt. They can call almost anything honey or milk or whatever they want to call it and get away with it. And of course, that's bad for the consumer and for all of us, whether you're a commercial guy or a professional guy or a small scale guy. When they start buying honey and they taste it and it's terrible, it was bitter, it was nasty, it was vegan honey, whatever, then our real honey its value is knocked down just a little bit. And we don't want that.
No. And when I was a kid, I hated honey, but at that point, I'd only had the bull crap, funny honey. And so when I was a teenager, I was 14, and I went to a local event, and there's a guy with an observation hive. Him and his wife ran about 20 hives, and they had some almost black locust white, water white honey. And then they had a darker summer honey, and they showed both of those and then sold it, and they let me try some. I realized that I actually did like honey quite a bit, and what I had experienced was not the real thing. And so that's exactly what we can't have. And I see this with kids in my family that have never, until they had my honey, they did not like honey, because what they'd had was probably rice syrup or corn syrup.
There's some of that, and there's a huge variety of honeys across the country. Some of them are much better tasting than others. For example, canola, I think is nasty. It's just horrible. But if you mix 10-15% of a good honey in with it, it tastes pretty decent.
I hope that Ian Stepler's here.
I have a funny story. Well, we'll blend his honey when it gets here to the
That's
U.S.
Right. So
Randy Alber's a friend of both of us, of course. Randy had advised me one time to try some sage honey. So I was out in California one year, and I picked up a jar of sage honey and took it home and didn't think anything of it. And I tried it one night. Randy had told me how great it was, and I opened that jar of honey, and it was horrible. Some of the worst honey I've ever had in my life. So I closed it back up, and next time I talked to Randy, I said something to him, but I said, hey, that sage honey was just terrible. He says, oh, well, somebody scammed you. You didn't get sage honey. Oh, okay. So I just assumed he was right. Well, a year or two later, he was at the house, and I thought about it, and I went and grabbed that bottle of sage honey, and I handed it to him. He popped the lid off that, stuck his finger in there and tasted it, and his eyes rolled back in his head, and he was in heaven. He thought that was the greatest stuff in the world. I can't even begin to stomach it, but it's what he grew up on, so he was used to that. So yeah, the taste vary from region to region.
And everyone likes something a little bit different, and so Tennessee honey is the best in the world, but there's some other good honeys out there. Now, getting back to kind of what's going on in the industry. So for those of you who maybe haven't been looking into what's going on the commercial and with the Canadians and the U.S., there's some people trying to get the Canadian border open to where we can, Charlie's he's wanted and not in a good way. But they people definitely are looking into getting this border open because it's a big issue for both sides. And I can see both points to a degree, but I'm going to give just a slight summary real quick, and then Charlie's going to dive into the details. So the Canadians have kind of a rough winter, and sometimes they have tough losses. And then if they get bees, where do you think they're going for them? They're not going to the US, they're going to other countries that are much further away and put us all at risk here in North America to bringing in new pests. We're attached to Canada at the hip. If we get something, it is extremely likely they're going to get it and vice versa. And I think having it closed in between the two of us is a good idea. That's my personal opinion. But Charlie, why do you think the border can be open? What benefit would it serve?
Well, let me give you a little history first. We closed, I shouldn't say we, the Canadians closed the border back in 1987. And it was, at that time, it was based around tracheal mites.
Mm-hmm.
And then it went to varroa mites. And then it went to Africanized bees. So there's been excuse after excuse after excuse of why the border needs to remain closed. Basically, the Canadians felt their biosecurity was endangered by issues we had here in the States. And I'm not going to try to argue or debate any of those points because I wasn't around back then. But for the last 15 to 20 years, we have been selling queens up there, but we're not allowed to sell bulk bees or package bees.
Mm-hmm.
So the Canadians developed a market of buying bees from Australia, Chile, and New Zealand were the main sources. And the last couple of years, they opened it up to a couple other places. Italy and the Ukraine, surprise, surprise, in the middle of the war, they decided to buy bees from Ukraine. I'm not going to pick on them because I think that was started long before the war and I just want it finished up. But it is kind of ironic that one of the countries with absolutely no inspection process at the moment can send bees, but we can't. The reason we want to open the border is twofold. The first one is that our commercial beekeepers have a surplus of bees in the spring. That's why package bees and nukes from commercial beekeepers have pretty much always been cheap. The bees are expanding fast, and we've got to do something with them. They either hit the trees or we try to sell them. So it's a good capital income for us. So the Canadians can use them because they don't have the season we have. Okay. You know as well as anybody, they have some loss issues up there over the winter, and getting replacement bees for a season that's only 4.5, 5 months long is difficult. Mm-hmm. Down here in the States, we have Florida, Texas, California, where our season is 9, 10, sometimes even 12 months. If you're in South Central Florida, you're raising bees all year long. So that's the background of the industry. The other concern that we have, and one of the reasons we brought it up recently to get the border open, is Tropolaelaps mites. That's a mite that's started in Indonesia on Apis cerana. It's following the exact same path that Varroa destructor and Varroa jacobson both have followed. For those of you who don't know, there are two different Varroa mites. The T mite is following the same path, but the T mite is far, far, far more destructive. It's something you just literally cannot live with. The Pakistanis got the T mite about 7 years ago, maybe 8 now, in Pakistan, and within 5 years, it wiped out all of the European honeybees. That's how bad they are. These T mites are terrible. So, bottom line is, some of the areas that Australia is picking up, that Canada is picking up bees from, border areas with Tropolaelaps mites. They're not taking bees from those countries yet, but they're close. They're close. Mm-hmm. We're playing with fire here. So the goal for us within the industry is to reassure the Canadians that our bees are healthy, and we know they are because they've been buying queens from us for the last 20 years, to the tune of 200,000 to 300,000 queens a year are exported from the U.S. And they normally take the queens that they get from Australia or New Zealand, and they replace them with a North American queen. That's been the standard for them for 20 years. So what we want to do is we want to open that supply again in the hopes that in the future they will consider closing down the borders for Australian bees, or Italy is in deep danger of Tropicale lapse mites. Ukraine, they've already been found in Russia, so it's really right on the edge. So in order to get our biosecurity in place, this is kind of the first step we have to have, because it's not fair for us to ask the Canadians to shut the border down to all import bees when they don't have a source. That's just not fair.
So basically, you know, Tropicale lapse mites are a big problem, and the way that Canada's importing could make all of North America vulnerable. And the argument that some of the Canadians have on why the border should not be opened is they're concerned about small hive beetles and Africanized bees. And can you address that, please, Charlie?
Sure. Actually, I rewrote an article for ABJ this month, and the Canadians have asked for that article on small hive beetle. But let's talk about the other issue first. That's a little bit easier to tackle. Well, let's go ahead with small hive beetles. The small hive beetles were actually the first 5 or 6 cases in the United States were actually found in Canada. They came from Australia. They came in some of their packages. But the beetles never actually took hold in the northern climates. They found a couple and then they were gone. Somewhere around 2005, I believe it is, don't quote me on the date there, they made their way to Florida. And as most of your viewers know, they stayed. Okay, yeah. Our southern climate, Florida, apparently is much nicer than Ontario in the summer. I don't get it. Maybe Ian can expand on that. But bottom line is they're here to stay. Over the last 20 years, they've become a pain in the butt for a lot of us here in the Midwest. I know, Cayman, you have them in your area, and they're not fun to deal with. But the truth is they've stabilized. They're really not expanding any further. And there's a lot of guys that, winter in Florida, winter in Texas, winter in Mississippi, pick up small hive beetles, and then they head north to Wisconsin and Minnesota and New York, all of the other north areas. But the beetles never really become a problem. They just don't breed and expand well in colder climates. They need certain soil temperatures, certain types of soil where they can pupate successfully, and they need several brood cycles to get to the point where they're a real issue for us. So small hive beetles in my area, when we bring them back, they start breeding in March. Okay, and they do in everybody's hives, just a few at a time. That first round, you're going to get 10, 15, 20 little beetles drop out, and you're probably never even going to notice them. Maybe you saw 1 or 2 beetles running around the hive. They wipe out a brood cell or 2, and you never see it. The bees clean up the mess. But those beetles hit the ground, the larvae, they pupate, and then all of a sudden you have 20 beetles. And then 3 weeks later, you have 120 beetles. And 3 weeks after that, you're in deep trouble. So that's what we see here. But if you take those same bees to Minnesota, the soil temperature is 10 to 15 degrees cooler. The beetles do not pupate fast enough. They don't have the warmth in the soil. Their pupation rate is based on soil temperature. The colder it is, the longer it takes. So they don't get those 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 cycles of beetles that really hit us late. I know, Cayman, you see them in the fall like crazy, but in the spring they're pretty well.
Oh, yeah, we do. The best defense is a good offense, having a good, strong hive. And, you can throw some traps. Primarily when we use traps or things to kill them, it's for the smaller hives, especially when they're starting off. We'll invest the time to clear them out of those. But one of the things that the smaller beekeepers have an advantage over guys like you that are running thousands is they can get a bottom board like for those of you who've seen my video on the Apame pollen trap / bottom board that has a screen, it has a tray in the bottom. One's for pollen, but the one below is for IPM mite drops. But when you're not doing that, you can put diatomaceous earth down there. And as those larvae drop or beetles drop down, the bees can't get down in there, but the diatomaceous earth will kill them. And, having tools like that can help keep those numbers low. But most commercial guys aren't going to probably fool with that. Charlie, are you going to do that with your 4,000 or 5,000 hives you're going to fool with this year?
We have tried all of those tricks, Gaiman. Nematodes, traps, Swiffer sweets, everything. And we've turned it into basically just mechanical. We don't use chemicals at all unless a yard gets bombed. Once in a while, you'll have a hive that gets completely wiped out and the beetles get in the ground, and then we'll put some guard star down. But other than that, we don't use plastic frames. We keep the feeder away from the wall, and as you said, you keep nice strong hives. And strong means for us that all the frames are covered with bees. It can be a single, it can be a nuke, but we're not having 4 or 5 frames of brood and honey that's unprotected. That unprotected honey is just a place for the beetles to eat.
So Canada's not at risk for small hive beetles at all, and I think we all know it. So that's not a good reason to not open the border. And opening the border, the main benefit I see is that North America, as far as Canada and the United States, we're working as a team now. We're also, hopefully, Canada will decide not to be importing from other countries that would put us all at a greater risk.
That would be the next question. Yes. So to answer, you had 2 questions there. One was small hive beetles. One of the things you need to understand too is that Australia, where they are getting a lot of packages now, is small hive beetle heaven.
That is true. They got a bunch of them.
Yeah. So to say we can't buy them from the U.S. because you have beetles when Australia already has them is kind of peculiar.
Dumb.
No. Canadian friends. The other one you mentioned was a legitimate concern for a long time, and that was Africanized bees.
Yeah.
And I'm sure most of your viewers and listeners are fairly new to the industry. But I can assure you that 20 years ago, even us commercial beekeepers were standing back looking at Africanized bees going, uh-oh, this is going to be a problem. And I remember many conversations about how to manage them and what was coming and all of that. And it's kind of turned out to be a nothing burger, if you will. And the reason for this is, of course, we all get hot hives. Every one of us has had that hive that you cringe when you have to go after. Some of my worst ones were actually native little black German bees from way back when in church towers and that, and they just eat you alive. But what it's turned out is there's 2 issues. One, beekeepers. We, the people, when we buy queens and we get hot queens, it isn't very long we quit buying those. They just don't get propagated. There's a couple places in Texas that used to sell a whole lot of queens, and unfortunately their area has been run by Africanized bees. They have a lot of wild, nasty bees, and they can't breed anymore. So those areas are no longer hotbeds of queen production. East Texas is one of those areas. Central Texas, there's a couple breeders there that I'm not going to mention their names. But for the longest time, they had great queens. But nowadays, they'll tell you they're going to be a little spicy.
Yeah, they're going to be a little spicy, all right. And I know several new beekeepers, that's their first package they ever get. And boy, what a way to get into beekeeping right there.
One of my my early truck drivers was from San Antonio right after Africanized bees came over. And he told me how they work bees. They bought one of those Man Lake suits at night. They worked them only at night with red lights on, naked under the suit because it's so hot down there and there's no breeze at night. And he said, you do not bang boxes. And once they get riled up, you get out of the yard. So
that's but that's what in just a few isolated pockets here in the United States, and they've never moved up into Bama or Tennessee or Indiana or anywhere like that. It's basically just the rim of the very southern areas of the U.S.
And what's interesting is if you get a hot set of bees, you can contact your local inspector, and most of them have access to send those bees off for genetic testing. But I can tell you that I've talked to the people who do the genetic testing, and they will tell you that 99% of the time, they don't come back Africanized. They're just spicy bees. When you get a real Africanized batch, and I have gotten a couple of them, there's no doubt. It's pretty clear. Pretty clear.
So what are the economic impacts? That's one of the things the commercial beekeepers are struggling, because almonds long term are not looking good. It's not good for the farmer, which means it won't be good for the beekeeper. They're not planting more almonds in California. Also, the honey prices right now are really down, and that's not looking very good either anytime soon. And so the commercial beekeepers to survive are looking for something that maybe can give this industry a little bit of a boost. And the Canadian border, if it opens up, do we have a general idea on the economic impacts to U.S. beekeepers and how much it could benefit Canada?
That's the interesting question. The Canadian side is a little harder to calculate. From the U.S. side, it's somewhere between $20 and $40 million to our industry, which is sounds like a lot. It's about a 10 to 15% bump over what commercial guys normally get.
Mm-hmm.
But the beauty of that is that it allows some of the bigger beekeepers to continue operations without raising prices on other products. So you think, well, it's going to drive the price of everything up. And that's not the case. The problem is, like queen prices, you guys know queen prices are getting up there. They're expensive. But it's a matter of how much it takes to produce that. So if a big commercial beekeeper can suddenly pull in another $1 million or $2 million from a Canadian customer, that's $1 million or $2 million he doesn't have to try to get from his current customer base. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Australians aren't going to be happy about that, but that's a whole other problem. The interesting thing from the Canadians is they're paying an awful lot of money for packages, and they have a very limited supply. So opening the border down here will reduce their cost. And I'm guessing, we don't have any sort of real answer. We're guessing that the demand is going to be bigger than it is from Australia. Typically, the Canadians are not super happy with the Australian packages. Keep in mind, when Australia shakes packages, it's those fall bees. It's fall in Australia.
Really?
Yeah. Think about that for a second. And a lot of them are coming off almonds. So you're getting some of the old bees that need to be replaced. Whereas if you buy bees from Georgia or California in that spring season, those are young spring bees that have never been out of the box, and they're all fresh and new and ready to go to work for you.
Mm. So getting to something that I'm really interested, I spent some time with Randy Oliver this last July, and we've talked back and forth. And I know you and Randy are thick thieves, which gets you both in trouble quite often.
It
But
has.
so what are you and Randy Oliver trying to do? I know Randy's always just in deep with several different projects, but we have some. He has some concerns about being able to use some things. And what all are you guys trying to do right now? We got a lot of issues.
Well, Randy started last year, and I was working with him at the same time. We started asking the EPA some of the hard questions. The current EPA rules for miticides are peculiar. I got to watch how I say this so it doesn't come off wrong. They're written they straddle the fence on a couple issues. Biopesticides are what we deal with. Oxalic, thymol, and formic are the three that Randy really likes because they are, as he puts it, extremely safe. They're not hard on the environment. They're naturally occurring miticides. Unfortunately, all three of those have been registered as a pesticide at one time or another. So the EPA's viewpoint is that they are allowed to control and regulate those. But the EPA rules say that it has to be a hazard to man or the environment before they're allowed to regulate. So there's some question about whether or not they're really allowed to regulate things like oxalic acid, which is naturally occurring in things like rhubarb and that. But they insist that they can, in fact, regulate it. So Randy really wanted to clarify some of that stuff. And we did pretty good talking to the EPA last year, and we got some really good answers. Unfortunately, when we started talking to the legal department, because we asked if they would put those answers in writing, the story changed a little bit. The legal department at the EPA is not quite as nice as the biopesticide divisions, okay? Mm-hmm. Or as tolerant would be the right answer. So Randy's still trying to get some clarification on that. I don't know how much clarification we're going to get. So, with Randy's help and a few others in the industry, we actually wrote a change to FIFRA, and we're now trying really hard to get that in the system. The Farm Bill is the tool that we have to do that. And there's another factor in this. At the same time, about November last year, we got told by the EPA that the FDA was going to take over miticides. This was based on ectoparasites for dogs and cats. There's some problems there with a couple of flea and tick collars, so they said we're going to kick this over to the FDA. That's extremely bad for beekeepers. It's going to make our pesticide approval process probably 3 times as long and twice as expensive as it currently is. It would also mean that for several things, you would have to have a veterinarian's prescription, which if you've ever tried to buy any of these pesticides, you realize that's difficult. There's not many veterinarians who actually want to work on bees. So those type of things fell in together at the same time. So we came up with a proposed rule change that allows us to stay with the EPA and at the same time allows the EPA to make some special rules for beekeepers. One of the reasons the legal department at the EPA didn't want to give us anything in writing was because if they let us do it, then every other group out there also has to do that, because we are not designated as a special group. So we said, Randy and I and a few others said, well, let's get designated as a special group. Let's see if we can get it done. And that's what we're currently trying to do. It's a battle.
We definitely are a special group. Have you seen beekeepers? And the commercial guys, they're even more special. When I was there at the honey producers in San Diego, there were some interesting characters at the honey producers. Good beekeepers, but definitely would classify into the special category. Some of them are truly special, and some of them have special needs. So, all jokes aside, though, how does this really affect the nut? How does this affect the small sideliner, the hobby beekeeper, the young guy or gal who's thinking, I'd like to go into beekeeping? What you and Randy are trying to do, getting the EPA to give us a special classification, or what is Randy trying to do with the thiamol and the oxalic acid and all this? What would it mean if this could work?
Well, there's a couple things. First, when you talk about special, I keep brushing my hair back because I'm 3 months behind from a haircut because it's bee season. So yeah, we are special.
You look it.
But one of the things we have to recognize is it doesn't matter how many beehives you have, varroa are a problem. Okay, and we are using some form of mite control in almost every hive in the U.S. Okay, some of it's doing natural techniques, some of it's using oxalic, thiamol, formic, amitraz if you're using apivar strips, many different techniques out there. Mm-hmm. Right now, the rules are extremely strict. If you bought your oxalic acid from the hardware store and you use it in your beehives, you're breaking the law. Mm-hmm. If you put thiamol crystals in your hive, technically you're breaking the law. Okay, mm-hmm. All of these things are perfectly safe, perfectly natural, and not a problem. They've all been tested in honey. They don't build up residues. They're literally not an issue. All we want to do is make it so the EPA can say, yeah, you're right. We're okay with that stuff. And that applies to everybody. It doesn't matter if you have 1,000 hives or 2 hives.
Mm-hmm. And that would make it to where someone could go get oxalic acid and make some of Randy's sponges or shop towels and apply those, and it would be legal to do. And some countries actually have that to where you legally could just go get oxalic acid, get vegetable glycerin, make up these treatments for your hives that break down into the most natural building blocks that we encounter daily, and also would create a lot of innovation as well, because with that freedom would come the opportunity for more people to test and try things. And I think we could dial in these products even more, as Randy has dialed in oxalic acid. which we may live to see a time where we desperately need more dialed in treatments, because if we end up with AAA lapse, we are going to need to be more dialed in than ever. And I am encouraged that we're all communicating and sharing this knowledge, and that there are people like you and Randy who are pushing on these hard issues, because the things that we need on that side are very difficult. They don't want to fool with us. They want us to go away. Beekeepers are not going to get anything unless we give it ourselves. And that's just all there is to it. They may say out there that we love beekeepers and bees, but they are not going to make our lives better. And they're not going to create good things for us if we just don't do them ourselves. And the opportunities out are there, but we need men and women to step up and to go after these things that we desperately need. And we behind the scenes are trying to do what we can. Charlie, I know you're doing a lot, and I appreciate what you do very much. We have a couple of questions from the crowd we're going to throw at you, and then we'll let you go. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you around, Charlie. Chris, give me a couple of the questions for Charlie.
All right. And again, this is all right. The first question here is from Thomas.
How prevalent are stolen hives and almonds? I've seen a couple videos from Dustin Reeder recently.
That's a great question. In the scale of things, it's a tiny issue. But if it's your hives that got stolen, it's the end of the world. Okay, that's all there is to it. Over the last couple of years, there has been a sheriff's deputy out there who has specialized in stolen hives, and he's actually done a pretty good job for the last couple of years. This year, he caught another ring. That's his third major bust that I know of. My understanding,
it's a sting operation, Charlie. Come on,
multiple sting operations. But yeah, most of the commercial guys I know have had a couple of hives disappear here or there. But as far as prevalent, it's really not usually a very big deal.
So, some of these guys stealing stuff, it's serious. I mean, it's like a chop shop for bees.
Yes, exactly.
It's like
they bring them in, they burn off the brands, they repaint the boxes, they send them out on a pollination gig, so they draw on a couple $100 check right off the bat. And some of them pick them up, and some of them just sell them right out of the almonds to somebody else. And one of the things you have to understand, Cayman, you've been out there with me this year. There's boxes everywhere. Yeah. And when you're coming out of almonds, there's 15 brokers and 250 truckers and 75 loading rigs who are trying to load up 1.8 million hives in a 2-week period and get them the heck out of California. So getting the wrong boxes or selling boxes with somebody else's name on it happens pretty quick and easy.
So here's a comment, semi-related. Do you think there's any competition between almond orchards and walnuts? They've been planting an enormous amount of acreage in the last 10 to 15 years. What do you think about that?
It's a great question. There are 2 crops in California that growers want to stay away from. The first one is walnuts, and the second one is almonds. They're both crops that just don't make any money. The walnut trees, most of those are stable. The walnut trees are good for 35 to 40 years. So most of the walnut orchards that are still in place are ones that have been around for a long time. The almond orchards, as you saw, Cayman, there's a lot of them coming out. The quandary gets to be it takes 5 to 8 years to get into the market, 5 to 8 years to get mature trees. And then by then, the market's changed from what it was.
Yeah, and it's a shame because, you see all that they're doing out there in the almonds, and when it's far away and it's not your problem, it doesn't really mean anything to you. But I see a lot of the posts on Facebook and people just like, it's good. We want the almond growers and the commercial beekeepers to suffer. And I think that's a terrible way to look at it. It's also I think, an ignorant way to look at one. Some people don't like our food system. And hey, I grow my tomatoes and radishes and turnips and lettuce and all kinds of stuff. I like to eat healthy, healthier than most people. But this system was created by our forefathers because they didn't want 80% of the U.S. population to have to farm like they used to. Your great-grandparents all were growing food because they had to. And it wasn't until the last couple of generations that we have been able to just go to the grocery store and get stuff. And the trade-off is very few of us farm anymore. And so we're out of touch with what that takes. And when you grow watermelons, you grow almonds, you grow pumpkins, and we all like affordable foods. We have the cheapest foods in the world. And it is because, and a lot of part because of honeybees. You could not have watermelons and apples and stuff as cheap as we do without honeybees. And so is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it is the way things are. And if everyone who complained about it wants to go and start their own apple orchards and their own watermelon patches and do it small scale, more power to them. But they won't have time to sleep, just like their great grandparents didn't either. Those 16-hour work days are fantastic. So
Cam and
yeah,
I will make sure we get this one last one in here from Roy.
All right.
I think it's a nice end cap for Charlie here.
Roy, how are, as beekeepers, small and large, can we help talk to our state reps to help make changes? That's a great way to end this. What are things that we should look forward to that maybe we can help you with, or what's something that we can do, Charlie?
Well, the best thing to do is talk to your state organizations. Your state organization should be up to speed with what's trying to be done. Like right now, we're trying to get, Randy and I are both asking all the state organizations to write letters supporting our position. The intent is to then hand that to a congressman or a senator. The problem we have is when all people run to their state senators and congressmen, they don't get a good story. They get a bunch of small stories. Mm-hmm. And we've got to battle that. Your state association is the best way to do that. They'll know who to contact and who to support. So I would ask, if I could, Cayman, any of your members who are leaders of larger groups or involved with their state organization, get a hold of me offline, and I'll send you some stuff to look at and see if you guys want to help us with the EPA FDA issue.
So can I share your email or something like that? What's the best way to do that? All right, I'll make sure to share your email and everything. Charlie, we'll have you on in the future. We're looking forward to seeing you at the Bee Expo, and I'm sure we'll see you at other conferences and things.
You promised to come to the watermelon patch with us, so
yeah. We'll see you in the watermelon patch as your bees are going out there pollinating watermelons. And you do what, squash too, or something like that?
We do cantaloupes, watermelons, and cranberries for the main summer one, and then we do pumpkins. So pumpkins is one of our big crops. And you were talking about modern ag. It's interesting for me. I pollinate literally half of the ornamental pumpkins in the United States. And
really?
I think about the small area that those are grown on, and the scale of efficiency is unreal. There are, I'd say probably 20 growers that I deal with. Mm-hmm. And when you get right down to it, it's somewhere around 2,000 acres, which is 2 or 3 square miles. But that is half of the pumpkins in the United States. So it's very efficient.
Those ornamental pumpkins, it's when your kids want to, or grandkids want to do a jack-o'-lantern, you got bees to thank to get those. So Charlie, go ahead.
Linus is my friend.
Oh yeah. Well, I tell you, Charlie, we really appreciate you carving out some time. I know you were in the bees earlier today, and we appreciate you visiting us, and you keep in contact with me. If there's anything that we can do, whether it's signatures or badgering and bullying political people into signing stuff to help us out, we'll get right behind it. As long as it's good for bees, we're all about that.
If anybody wants to chain up a senator in their basement, just let me know.
Oh, gosh. You heard it here first. Thanks, Charlie. We'll see you later.
Have a good one, Cayman.
All right, folks. So I want to say first, thanks to Charlie and Dave Dwyer. Thank you so much for supporting our kid program. That is our future. And we really appreciate guys like Charlie and Randy Oliver and others who are fighting these battles with the EPA, communicating with the regulatory systems, and talking to other countries as well to try to make a better beekeeping place for these young kids to grow up in. Some of these people like Natalie and Rainier and many of the other ones, Caleb Abshire and Robbie and so many Grayson that have been with our young, youth program. They're wanting to be professional beekeepers or sideliners, and they're still really young. We owe it to them to create a place for them to be able to do that, as we and give it to them hopefully better than what we found it. So Charlie's on the forefront with others to help protect our bee industry, and we'll be hearing from him in the future, and we will be working with him behind the scenes like we have been doing for a little while. So, and Dave, appreciate you, man. Hootie's honey and bees. With the amount of honey in the U.S. produces just as fruits and veggies, there's no reason to buy from other countries. I agree with that. By and large, definitely. I think it is okay to bring in some honeys because there is some cool, unique stuff from other places around the world, but it needs to be like a small sampling. If we produce 90% of the honey, then yeah, we can bring in maybe 5-10% from other countries, Canada being one of them. The good we have a good relationship with the Canadians on them producing good quality stuff. And then, hey, we find some unique honeys, but it has to be trusted sources. If this changed right now, the prices of honey would immediately go up drastically, and that would create great opportunities for young commercial beekeepers. Natalie Summers wants to be a commercial beekeeper, and I think she's well on her way, pretty darn good for a 16-year-old girl. And I think she's well on her way to being one of the most interesting female beekeepers in the professional scene of beekeeping. So definitely want to see her do that and teach more people how to do the same. But part of the puzzle is getting out there in front of the EPA, getting out there in front of the regulatory systems and fighting these battles. They're not going to fight themselves. All right, let's get to some more questions. Russell Koopman makes a statement. Indiana won the black jar 2 years in a row at Cayman's trade show. That is true. Obviously, there must have been something rigged. Somebody from Indiana must have slid some of that delicious honey under the table, paid somebody off. That is a pretty awesome, though. Now, the year before, this wasn't the black jar, though. This was the extra white classification. Tennessee did get a blue ribbon that year, but it's great. We want to see people. So, what'd you say, Chris?
Technicalities here.
Yeah, technicalities. Yeah, getting in the weeds. So, all right, we have some more questions, Chris.
I got a question here for you from Paul. I do want to say the Texas Beekeeper. I appreciate the comment, but we'll stop perpetuating. Oh, hold on before I advance here. Jeremy had a question for you.
Chris, ask Cayman when dinner is ready. Not soon enough. I'm ready to eat. That's for sure. Chris, you can. We'll go to Buc-ee's sometime.
Oh, okay. You got me.
Jake Osborne, wait a minute. That honey was just across the river from Kentucky. Just saying. Yeah, but those bees are smart bees. They didn't set a toe in Kentucky. Oh, goodness.
I'm picking up some unique things here, and then we'll get your first question.
All right. The U.S. produces only 1/3 of the honey bought in the U.S. Yeah, and there's no reason for that. We have plenty. We have a massive country. We have a very impressive agricultural structure. We could do it, but if you're a young beekeeper, my age, 20s, 40s, 50s, whatever, and you're looking at producing commercial levels of honey, hundreds or thousands of drums, and you're seeing the price below $2 a pound for that, that's not going to get you super excited and may not make it to where you can pay the bills, especially for young people who have to go get some debt for it and get a forklift and all these different things. We need to get that price of honey up there. Even getting it up close to $3 would be a massive boom for the commercial beekeepers. And that's how you get young people involved, to show that, hey, they can make a living. Guys like Jake Osborne, who are too crazy to do something else. Oh, there he is right there. Ask Cayman if he's ever had any honey from the Bahamas. Actually, I have. I forgot to mention that. So I was over by Jeremy recently. I did a swarm removal in Knoxville. I got called because there was a swarm hanging off of a cart in Kroger. And Randy McCaffrey called me. He's like, I'm a little too far away to go to Knoxville. Can you do this, Cayman? And I'm like, I don't do that kind of stuff, Randy. And he's like, come on, you can do it. And I had to go out there and visit Jeremy anyways and drop off a thorn extractor. And so it worked out. It was on the way. And Jeremy had some honey from the Bahamas, and it was really bizarre. I've never tasted anything like it before. Makes me want to go to the Bahamas, and not just for the honey. I think Laurel's ready to go.
All right. All right. We got a question here from Paul. Again, if you guys have any questions, we'll see what we can get to here in the remaining time we got, but we'll start with Paul.
Hey, Cayman, have you used queen mandibular pheromone? That's what the QMP, for those who don't know, to temporarily substitute a queen after doing a split. Please comment. Do you feed sugar water after splitting without experience robbing in the apiary? Thanks. So I have never used queen mandibular pheromone, and this is a synthesized version, folks. You can purchase this. I've used it, but not in this situation. So when I was using it, I was making up those little polystyrene mini nukes. And because they didn't have any brood and you're introducing a virgin queen or a queen cell, there's no queen pheromones. There is no brood pheromones to lock them in. And they will just abscond if you don't do things just right. And that queen mandibular pheromone that they synthesize really helps keep them in there. I have never used that in a split. I imagine if you used enough of it, it probably would reduce that quite a bit, Paul. It would make sense that it would. Now, one of the things that I do when I kill a queen in a colony because she's no good, I crush her head for multiple reasons. One, it just kills her immediately. We want to be humane about it. But also, we want to crush any of that mandibular pheromone out, and we leave her in there. I usually push her into the comb to where it takes a lot of work to get her body out. And this allows her pheromone to linger in there longer. And we introduce the new queen at the same time. So as her pheromone is waning, the other queen is starting as being accepted. And the other thing is that old queen's pheromone slows down, or it really just slows down them wanting to raise their own queen cells as an emergency. If you just quickly pull a queen out of there, they will start raising queen cells a lot faster than crushing the queen into the comb. A lot of old-time beekeepers would actually crush the queens into the cage of the new queen to where that pheromone would be onto the cage, and they said it would help acceptance with that new queen. I do feed sugar water while I'm splitting. It really helps in every single way. It lowers the stress. The bees are happier, and they have all that food they're exchanging. They're going to feed your queen better through the cage during introduction to the hive, and a little bit of feed is good. I don't like using pheromones, essential oils in my feed when I'm doing this. I don't want anything to block her pheromone presence. Now, with the whole robbing part, that is a little tricky. If it's in robbing season, you want to make sure that you're not starting that. So you would want to have a feeder inside the hive, a jar covered by a box and a lid. Definitely robbing is one of the worst things that you can do for a queen introduction, but having sugar syrup on there is great too. And when you introduce the queen, don't come in, in 3 or 4 days. Give it a week at the earliest, and 10 days would be better. And what you may find is they may have tried to draw out a cell or two, and they've accepted that queen. I've seen this before, and that's why we usually come back on day 10 and we'll just do a gentle inspection. Don't beat everything up. And we will look through some of them and the frames and see if they've drawn any queen cells. They could have some capped cells. That doesn't necessarily mean that queen that you introduce is bad. A lot of times she'll be laying, but they'll accept both, and then that virgin emerges out of that cell and will kill your good queen. So at day 10 or so, we go in there and we see if the queen's laying. If we do spot a cell, and most of the time we don't, then we crush those cells. Okay, where are we at?
All right, we got a question here from Matt.
How do you grow the population of your hives? Well, the first thing, there's nothing that you can do if you don't have a good queen. If you have an old queen, a queen that's been exposed to viruses because the mites at some point got too high, or she's just a bad queen, and sometimes you get a package or a nuke or whatever, and the queen is just absolutely worthless. There's nothing that you can do to grow the population of your hive. Excuse me. But if you have a good queen, then they need protein. We a lot of times talk about sugar water and all that kind of stuff, and I'm just going to have to cough again. I got a tickle. So we have to have proteins and fats, all these minerals and vitamins. The sugar syrup does not provide that. Even nectar provides a little bit of some of those things, and it's really helpful, but it will not get you brood. You've got to have diverse pollens or feed some pollen substitute to help get bees. There can be a honey flow for 3 months, but if there is no pollen coming in, your colony will crash. So that is often overlooked, is how much bee bread do we have in there, which is the stored pollen? How much pollen is coming in? And if we're in the summer months, is this corn pollen, which is almost useless to bees? Or is this a good pollen from whatever? The clover pollens are good. Maple pollens are good. Dandelion pollens in the south are not good by themselves. They're useful, but they have to be mixed with other pollens or bee bread. And sunflower pollen's the same. It has some benefits, but by itself, it is not a good pollen to raise brood on by itself. And so this is a complicated issue. This is where sometimes feeding some pollen patties can really help your new colonies grow. If you have small hive beetles, then slicing it into thin strips and putting on the right amount at the right time can be really helpful. Feeding sugar syrup is very beneficial too, and both should be done at the same time if there's not a natural flow going on. But that is how you grow the population. You have to have a great queen. You have to have low mites, low issues, disease, whatever. And you have to have good nutrition and lots of it. And it's easy to grow bees in the spring. In Tennessee, it's very hard to grow bees in late July and August. There's just nothing for them to forage on. You can feed all day long, but if they've lost momentum, it's very difficult for them to go anywhere. And we're definitely not going to be able to come close to what they look like in spring. You just cannot mimic spring conditions. That is why it is important to keep your bees alive, get them through that spring, and then you can split like crazy here in Tennessee in late March, April, May, and June. But any time outside of that, you're going to have to be really good and make strong splits and be smart about your decisions in Tennessee. So, Rylan Pena, thank you so much. How soon can you introduce a mated queen to a split? Also, when will you grow a beard? Laurel says no beard, so not likely, Rylan, not in this decade at least. How soon can you introduce a mated queen to a split? So I went into some this week and I dropped some of Zach's Hawaiian queens. I killed the old queen and I dropped the new queen in there immediately. And that's great. But there's one thing I've been experimenting with lately. I was going to kind of share it in a video, but that's what this is for. It's for the spoilers, for the hardcore fans that are here, right? Yeah. So I really like this idea, and it seems to be working pretty good for me. But I got to do some more of it and more observation, data collecting, whatever. So I am making my split or killing my poor queen on a Saturday, and I am treating that day with oxalic acid vapor. Then I come back a week later and introduce the queen that I purchased that was shipped to me or I raised myself, whatever. So they've been queenless for a week. And it's not good to let them to go queenless too long, but when I go in there, they're going to have a lot of emergency cells. I am going to crush each one of those. And then I'm going to treat with oxalic acid vapor right before I introduce the queen in there. And so I am just thrashing the mites because when I treat the first time on the first Saturday, I'm killing what mites were exposed right then so they can't go into any of the larvae fixing to be capped. Then when I treat a week later, there's a lot of brood that has emerged, young bees, mites have been brought out, and I'm treating again. Then I'm introducing the queen and I'm feeding them sugar syrup. And then I am going to come back 10 days later. One of the advantages of introducing her 7 days later is I crush all the queen cells, introduce her, and now they cannot raise their own queen. They have to accept her. The other thing is 10 days later, excuse me, after the queen's been laying, she should be out of her cage, should be laying good. She shouldn't have her brood capped yet, or it'll be really close. Her brood gets capped on day 9. So day 10, she shouldn't be out of the cage within 24 hours and laying too hard. So if I come back on day 9 or day 10, I am going to see the queen laying. I am then going to treat with oxalic acid. And over those 3 treatments, I'm going to have a new queen and just thrash the mites. So I've been trying that out to a small degree, and I'm fixing to do it a bunch after the flow. I'm hoping to see some really good results and do some alcohol washes with some decent mite populations of over 1% infestations to determine, is this a really good approach to where we can clean the mites out of the hives, get a fresh young queen with a split or a requeen an old queen in a hive, and really just kind of get our cake and eat it too, because we are dialed in on these treatments. So I'm very excited about that. But I introduced that queen with a split immediately. We are to the point of ending this, but we're going to go about another 10 minutes because I spent a little bit more time with Charlie. It was a very interesting talk, and I'm very thankful for what they're doing. Let us take a couple more questions, Chris. Let me take this one because I'm already on this phase right now. What mite treatment can I do with Superzon? You legally can use oxalic acid vapor with honey Superzon, and you can use formic acid with honey Superzon. Those are the 2 products that you can use. There's fixing to be a product called Viroxan, which will be produced by the folks that make Apiguard, and it is an oxalic acid vegetable glycerin like cardboard strip that hangs down, and that will be legal to use with honey Superzon. That is super exciting. It's very safe. It's been tested by some of the best researchers in the country, and that gives us another option. But that is not ready and available to buy quite yet. They're hoping by summer. So that's what you can do right now, Honey Pine Acres channel.
All right. Let's do this one from Tracy and talking about swarms.
How long until you check on a newly caught swarm? So I check on it about 8 to 9 days after I've put it in the hive. This is because I really want to do oxalic acid vapor. I made a post on Facebook where I caught about a 5 to 6 pound swarm, treat it with oxalic acid vapor before they capped the brood. I dropped over 200 mites in that swarm. Those bees looked great, and now they are on about 2 deeps of drawn fresh comb. Beautiful patterns. The queen's going crazy. But if those 200 mites reproduced, 21 days later, that's 400 odd, 800, 1,600. That colony would have not made it to the end of the year because of that mite population. Swarms can have higher mite populations than that. So I like to get in there, Tracy, 8 days if possible, because it's easy. I only have to use the oxalic acid vapor once. Now, if you don't do that, then you can do something later. It's just a nice window to take advantage of. But when I go in there, I don't treat first. I go in about day 8, day 9 at the latest, and I'm going to go see if the queen's laying, because sometimes you'll get a virgin queen in your swarm, and she's doing mating flights around that period. We don't want to treat with oxalic acid vapor while we have a virgin running around in the hive. So if you get in there, do a light inspection, they should be still drawing comb, and you're like, ooh, there's nothing laying in here. Give it another 7 or so days. And if you don't have a queen after the first 9 that you go in there, and then 7 more, and you don't have a laying queen, you're just not going to have one with that swarm. Something happened. So that's what I would do. But sometimes people get virgin swarms, and it's really confusing at times. Here's a question from Eric. I've started making extra queens to sell this year. Can you explain how you ship them successfully across the country? So I really like the JZBZ system. There are other ways to do it. Zach just sent me some in California queen cages. But my favorite method is the JZBZ, just my personal preference. And there's bars that you can buy that the queens can go down into these bars, and you glue the bar down into their shipping cages. And if you look on Man Lake or Dadant or any of the companies that sell a lot of this stuff, you can see in the queen rearing section, there are boxes that have screens on them, and it's made for shipping. You're going to glue that JZBZ bar down, and those JZBZ queen cages really pop into those quite well. And you're going to put candy at the bottom of them. And you just got to make sure that you make good candy that's not really soft and sticky. Make sure you have good candy. And that's why some people buy the California cages, is because you can buy the plugs for them with the candy already pre-made. And it's really nice. Saves you a lot of time. That's why Zach does it, because he raises a lot of queens. And he's also Hawaiian, so he's kind of a little lazy. He likes to sit back and eat all that exotic fruit they have over there. So that being said, I don't put bees in with the queens. It's just the queen. And then outside of all those queen cages, with just the queen in there, no worker bees or nurses, we are going to shake a bunch of nurse bees in there. And we're going to have a sponge in the corner. It'll be glued down, and it won't be sopping wet, but it will be holding what it can hold. And then we are also going to have some queen candy. I put it in like aluminum foil and just leave about a quarter size of that candy open at the top, and just build that foil around a flat bit of it. And I glue the aluminum foil down, and those loose bees in there can go eat off of that candy, feed the queens. They can go get some water, give some water to the queens. They can cluster around the queens if it's cold. They can get away from the queens if it's hot. The ventilation of those, I think it's right waist shippers is what those boxes are called. That's a really good method on that. But I would do some research on that, Eric. It's a great way to ship queens, but there are other ways to do it. Let's take 2 more questions, Chris, and then we'll call it. Osborne's Brothers Honey. Hey, Cayman, what can you use as a precautionary treatment for EFB? And is there anything over the counter for treatment? So there is terramycin. There are some products that you can use for that. I am terrible at this. I've never used terramycin before. As far as I can't tell you how to use it or to use it. People have used this with success. However, I've always just selectively bred that out. It's one of the number one reasons we raise our queens is if we see any chalk brood or EFB of any amount, we kill them. The queens got to go. And because of that, we just don't see it hardly ever. Now, I saw it like once or twice this spring. We requeened the colonies back to normal. We occasionally see it, but it's not like a widespread thing. Our bees have it. Everybody's bees have this EFB, but are your bees resistant to this? So if you don't have control of your queens, though, or a good source for them, the terramycin, as far as I know, is the only product that can be used. And you can look into all the big box stores, and you'll see in the treatment section the information on terramycin. I think you have to get vet approval now for it, though. All right. You got one more question, Chris?
Yep. Let's do 2 because this one's short.
Okay. What was the new oxalic acid treatment called that you mentioned may be released this summer? So that is Varoxan, and it is by the folks that make ApiGuard. Varoxan, Varoxsan. And then Easy Ox is the new oxalic acid that is for vaporizers, and it is much cheaper than the Apabioxyl, giving us a little bit more freedom of options. I like that very much. I'll be posting Charlie's email here just 1 second. We haven't done that yet. If anyone wants to email Charlie about having questions or ways to get involved and help the bee industry move forward, I'm posting his email down below. Make sure to also tease him about making me buy that expensive food for him and ordering that $100 and something platter by accident. That was hilarious. All right, Chris, what's that last question?
All right, last question here is from. Well, hold on. You can tell Mike to knock it off before Bob comes after you.
Oh, Cayman. What does he mean by that?
That means Cayman's better than Bob Benny.
Does it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Greater than or great? I mean, technically it's greater than, but it's typically like better than. Yeah.
It's not true, but I appreciate it.
Mike's gonna get you in trouble.
Yeah, the only thing that I'm better at than Bob Benny is talking a heck of a lot faster. That's about it. In baseball,
Yeah.
probably better at baseball.
Okay, last question here from John tonight.
John Bergen, what's the fastest way to draw new comb? We have made several splits and they don't have enough drawn frames. The fastest way is to get that queen laying. Queens that are laying hard really put pressure on, as long as there's food coming. It's a combination. Good comb drawing colonies have a great laying queen. That's the number one thing you got to have. And then you got to have an energy source. You got to have a lot of nectar or sugar syrup coming in. And then there's also got to be enough protein in there for them to be able to rear all the queen might lay 1,500 eggs a day, but if there's not enough protein or honey to be able to meet all the nutritional requirements, then they'll cannibalize some of her brood and you won't see that materialize into a nice, gorgeous pattern. But when the queen is laying 80% of a frame, it forces all the honey and pollen up towards the top. And then if you're feeding or there's a flow going on, they're bringing all this in, but the queen keeps hogging all the space. And she's forcing them to have to keep it into their bodies longer, the sugar syrup or the nectar. And the longer they hold it in there, eventually they're just going to consume it. And as the bees consume nectar or sugar syrup, they convert that into wax scales under their abdomen, and then they will use that to build comb. But you cannot draw comb quickly without a good queen. She's got to have enough bees to be able to get things going for her. But once they get going forward, keep them going forward, keep that food going. And here soon, we are going to have a follow-up video on our nuke follow along. On our third video, we're going to be adding more space. We're definitely going to be changing how we're feeding this colony because our weather has forced us to. And they are drawing combs a lot. You can learn a lot just from watching the video to see what an ideal colony should look like. And if you're in an ideal time of the year and you have 3 colonies in your yard, that's not 3, this is 3. And 2 of them are doing great and one of them's not. Why is that? There is always a reason. Is it the queen's fault? Did they have an issue that caused the population to go down? Did they get chilled? Do they have mites? Did the nuke that you got from Billy Bob end up having chalk brood in this one? What's the reason? It's a big challenge as a new beekeeper to figure these things out, but you can do it. It took me several years, but you can do it so much faster with the information that's online. Always stay hungry to learn. It's part of the process to lose bees. Keep at it. Feed, John. Make sure you got a good queen in there. And if necessary, throw some pollen patties. If you're concerned about small hive beetles and pollen patties, tinker around with it. Give them a little bit. Create plenty of surface area. Create some space above so they can tackle it and defend it. And then also maybe have an IPM tray at the bottom where the bees can't get to it, but you can have diatomaceous earth down there. And if any beetles drop down or larvae, they are going to die a horrible, excruciating death. And we can all sleep better. Have a good night. Hope you sleep well. Dream about bees. That's what I'll be doing. We'll see you in the next video.